My name's Jacob, I'm 30, and I never imagined that my birthday dinner would end up being the stage for the kind of humiliation that still echoes in my head. If you've ever felt like you were the outsider in your own marriage, the extra piece of luggage your in-laws couldn't wait to get rid of, you'll probably understand the pit that was already sitting in my stomach that night. I should have known something was off the moment I walked into the restaurant. The table was full. My wife, her parents, her two brothers, even her aunt and uncle. Everyone looked far too polished, as if they had been waiting for a show. My wife had her phone sitting face up on the table, like she was ready to capture some grand moment. At first, I thought maybe they had planned a surprise, something sweet. But the way my mother-in-law smirked when she saw me walk and told me otherwise. I've never gotten along with her. From the day I met her, she carried herself like she was auditioning for a role she had already decided I wasn't worthy of joining. According to her, I wasn't tall enough, successful enough, or polished enough for her daughter. She would make these little comments at every family gathering. Are you still at that job, Jacob? Or, don't worry, dear, not everyone can be ambitious. She'd slide the words in like a knife between the ribs, smiling sweetly to everyone else at the table while her eyes dared me to respond. I always held my tongue because my wife, at least back then, would squeeze my hand under the table, silently pleading for me not to make a scene. I thought I was keeping the peace. In reality, I was just letting them get comfortable disrespecting me. The first hint that my birthday dinner wasn't really about me came when the waiter asked about drinks. My father-in-law ordered an expensive bottle of wine without asking, and when the glasses were poured, he raised his to my wife instead of me. To our daughter, he said, beaming with pride, for always knowing what's best for herself. Everyone clinked their glasses, and I sat there with mine untouched, wondering why no one had even said happy birthday. My wife gave me a quick smile, but didn't correct him. That was the moment I felt the first pang of realization. I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the entertainment. Dinner carried on with that same subtle cruelty. My brother-in-law asked loudly if I was still driving that old car, like the whole table hadn't heard him say it at least a dozen times before. His wife laughed, covering her mouth like it was some scandalous secret. My mother-in-law leaned over to whisper something into my wife's ear, and I caught the words settling down eventually, and real provider. Every comment was wrapped in the same mocking laughter, like they had rehearsed their lines before I arrived. I tried to keep my composure, eating quietly while my chest burned. Inside, I was screaming. Why was my wife allowing this? Why was she sitting there, phone propped up, recording pieces of me unraveling for her family's amusement? And then it happened. The moment that turned what should have been a celebration into a scene I'll never forget. My mother-in-law, still wearing that smug smile, reached into her handbag and pulled out a crisp stack of papers. She slid them across the table with a deliberate slowness, the way a card shark reveals the winning hand. Happy birthday, Jacob, she said, her voice sweet as syrup. From all of us. The words stung in their simplicity, almost playful, as though this humiliation was the punchline of some long-running family joke. My wife raised her phone higher, clearly recording my reaction, her expression unreadable. The papers were divorce papers. My name was there, typed neatly across the top, next to my wife's. Every eye at that table was on me, waiting for me to break, to stutter, to fight back. My father-in-law chuckled like it was the most natural thing in the world. One of the brothers muttered, finally, under his breath, and his wife snickered. I stared down at the papers, then at the faces around the table, realizing that they hadn't gathered to celebrate me. They had gathered to watch me fall apart. My heart hammered in my chest, but a strange calm washed over me, too. They thought they had won. They thought I was cornered. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for a long, long time. I picked up the pen they had so generously provided, flipped through the pages without hesitation, and signed my name with a steady hand. The room went quiet, the smug smirks faltering. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and smiled, really smiled, for the first time that night. Then I stood up, pushed my chair back, and without a word, walked out of that restaurant. Behind me, I heard my wife's voice crack as she lowered her phone. My mother-in-law's confidence wavered in the silence I left behind. They didn't know yet, but I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I had already prepared something they could never see coming. And that's where everything really began. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't stomach the thought of sitting across from my wife and pretending like everything was fine. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the dinner in my mind. The smirks, the laughter, the way she had propped up her phone like I was a circus act she couldn't wait to post online. It was almost midnight when I finally parked outside a cheap motel. The neon sign flickered like it was on its last breath, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I was breathing clearer than I had in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the divorce papers in my mind, thinking about how long this had been building. That wasn't just a birthday ambush. It was the climax of years of small cruelties. When you marry someone, you imagine their family might become your own. But from day one, my in-laws made sure I knew I'd never be part of theirs. The first Christmas I spent with them, I brought gifts for everyone. Nothing flashy, just thoughtful things I'd saved up for. When it came time to open them, my mother-in-law held up the scarf I'd picked for her, gave it one glance, and said, "Oh, that's nice. Did you get this on sale?" Then she turned to her husband and said, "Good thing you bought me the necklace I actually wanted." Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. It only escalated from there. My wife's family had a habit of talking about me like I wasn't in the room. They'd sit around their dining table, sipping wine and trading jabs. "Do you think he'll ever get promoted?" her brother would ask, smirking. "Don't hold your breath," her father would reply, chuckling. My wife, instead of standing up for me, would giggle nervously and change the subject. Later, in private, she'd tell me I was overreacting, that it was just how they are. I told myself she loved me, and that was enough. But every time I swallowed my pride, they tasted blood. The favoritism was the worst. Her brothers could do no wrong. One of them lost his job after getting caught drinking on the clock, and her parents threw him a "you'll bounce back" dinner, showering him with gifts to lift his spirits. Meanwhile, when I landed a major contract at work, a project that took months of sleepless nights, they barely acknowledged it. Her father actually rolled his eyes when I brought it up, muttering, "Don't bore us with office talk." But when one of the brothers landed a job that lasted 3 months before he quit, it was paraded around like a crowning achievement. And my wife? Slowly but surely, she started to mirror them. She began comparing me to her brothers, always unfavorably. "Ryan makes so much more than you," she'd sigh one night, even though Ryan had just borrowed money from their parents for the third time that year. Or she'd say, "Daniel is so much more helpful with mom and dad," when in reality Daniel was living rent-free in their guest house, barely lifting a finger. I worked long hours, paid bills, and tried to build a future for us, but nothing ever seemed enough compared to her golden brothers. The manipulation was quieter, more insidious. My wife's parents controlled everything: where holidays were spent, what vacations were planned, even what house we bought. When we were searching, I found a modest place in a neighborhood I liked. It was close to my work, affordable, and had room to grow into. My wife seemed to like it too, until her mother told her it was beneath her. Suddenly, my wife hated it. We ended up buying a place across town, one her father helped us with. His help came with strings, of course. He would stop by unannounced, criticize my landscaping, point out that this house wouldn't even be yours if it weren't for us. And my wife would just nod along. The final months before the birthday dinner were like living in a slow-motion car crash. I could see what was happening, but I couldn't stop it. My wife started to spend more time at her parents' house than at ours. She would forget to tell me about family gatherings until the last minute, then guilt-trip me for not attending. Sometimes, I'd come home and find her already at her mother's, phone buzzing with messages in their group chat, messages I was never included in. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was an accessory they were working hard to discard. And discard me they did, on my birthday, of all days. But here's the thing. While they thought they were pulling the strings, I had already started weaving my own net. Weeks before that dinner, I noticed things, whispers that didn't add up, financial choices that seemed suspicious, and a smugness in my wife's demeanor that made me realize she was in on something larger than I had first thought. I began quietly gathering what I needed: paperwork, receipts, records, things they had no idea I could access. So when I signed those papers in front of all of them, it wasn't because I was defeated. It was because I was already 10 steps ahead. But before I could execute my plan, before the scales could finally tip, there was still more cruelty to endure, moments that would make me doubt myself, moments that would make me wonder if walking away quietly might have been the easier path. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the rising tension is what makes the revenge so much sweeter. And the weeks that followed the dinner? That's when the real games began. The weeks after that dinner felt like I was living in two parallel worlds. On the surface, my wife and her family behaved as if nothing had happened. My wife came home with her usual rehearsed smile, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day as though she hadn't just sat there while her mother slid divorce papers across the table. It was almost eerie, like they thought if they ignored the confrontation, I'd do the same. But underneath, something had shifted in me. The part of me that used to try to earn their approval, to be patient, to keep the peace, it was gone. What replaced it was colder, more calculating. I stayed quiet because I needed to. My plan wasn't ready yet. Every morning, I woke up and went through the motions. Work, bills, household chores. But every evening, I was quietly filing, scanning, and documenting. I had begun pulling threads, and what I found was worse than I ever imagined. The whispers I'd noticed before weren't paranoia. They were breadcrumbs leading to something much larger. The betrayal came crashing down one night, about 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. I remember it vividly. It was raining hard, the kind of storm that makes the whole house feel restless. My wife was out visiting her mother. She had been doing that more often lately, always with some excuse about needing to help with groceries or family planning. I didn't buy it. Something gnawed at me, an instinct I couldn't ignore anymore. Her laptop was sitting on the dining table, lid halfway open, like it was daring me to look. I had never been the type to snoop. I believed in trust, or at least I used to. But that night, with the rain pounding the windows and my gut screaming at me, I opened it. The first thing that hit me was the group chat. Not one I had ever seen before. It was titled Family Plan. My wife, her parents, her brothers, even her aunt were in it. Message after message scrolled before me, each one like a knife. Her mother, he signed them. Can you believe he didn't even fight? Pathetic. Her father, he'll be out soon enough. Make sure he doesn't take anything important. Her brother Ryan. Don't worry, he's too stupid to cover himself. The house is basically ours anyway. And then to my wife, relax. He has no idea what we've already moved. I froze. My chest tightened as I scrolled further. They weren't just pushing me out of the family. They were planning to strip me clean. Bank accounts, assets, even my personal belongings. There were screenshots of transfers, photos of furniture moved into storage units, even a casual mention of selling off his stuff before he notices. And then I saw the final blow, a message from my wife to her mother. He'll never see it coming. By the time he realizes what's happened, he'll have nothing left. Just how you wanted. I sat there in silence, the glow of the screen burning into me. My own wife. The woman I had trusted, defended, loved, and built a life with. She was orchestrating my downfall alongside the people who had hated me since day one. All those times I thought she was caught between us, pressured by her family. She wasn't caught at all. She was leading the charge. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just the divorce. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the discovery that the person I had shared my life with was actively gutting me behind my back. Every smile she gave me, every reassurance she whispered late at night, it was all a performance while she lined up the knives. I closed the laptop and just sat there in the dark, listening to the storm. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Something inside me shifted that night. Whatever part of me still clung to hope that things could be fixed, that maybe my wife loved me beneath it all, that part died the moment I read those words. From then on, there was no turning back. I wasn't just going to leave quietly. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure that when I was done, they'd never forget the day they tried to strip me of everything. But first, I had to endure. I had to let them think they were still winning. And in the days that followed, they doubled down in ways that tested every ounce of patience I had left. And then came the night when the betrayal stopped being digital whispers and became something tangible, something I couldn't unsee. That was the moment everything snapped. The night I read those messages, I thought I'd already hit the bottom. I thought the worst betrayal was discovering the truth written in my wife's own words. But I was wrong. Rock bottom wasn't the betrayal itself. It was living in the aftermath of knowing and still having to play along. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the last. My wife carried on like nothing had happened, greeting me with a kiss on the cheek, asking about my workday, making dinner. To anyone else, it would have looked like we were a normal couple. But I couldn't forget the chat, her words, or the casual cruelty she had typed with her own fingers. Every time she smiled at me, I saw the mask she wore. Every time she touched my arm, I wondered if she was calculating how much longer until it was gone from under her hand. Her family, emboldened by my silence, grew bolder. Her father began dropping by more often, striding through the front door without knocking, reminding me casually about how this house really wouldn't be yours without us. Her mother would call my wife on speakerphone while I sat in the same room, talking as if I weren't there. "Once Jacob's out, we'll finally make this place livable," she said once, her voice dripping with disdain. My wife laughed, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. And the worst part? My own home stopped feeling like mine. Furniture I had bought started disappearing. My favorite leather chair vanished one Saturday while I was at work, replaced with one her mother had always wanted her to have. When I asked about it, my wife waved a dismissive hand. It didn't fit the space anymore. Mom helped me redecorate. I checked the garage, the basement gone. It wasn't just the chair. One by one, my things began to vanish. Tools, keepsakes, even a watch my late grandfather had given me. Each time I noticed, my wife had a quick excuse, too quick. And I knew where they were going. Into those storage units her family had bragged about in that chat. Financially, the noose was tightening as well. Joint accounts suddenly drained without explanation. My paycheck disappeared within days of clearing, bills paid, but extra money siphoned elsewhere. I confronted my wife once, cautiously, asking why so much money was moving around. She gave me a look of pity, like I was a clueless child. "Don't worry about it. Dad's helping us manage things so we don't sink. You should be grateful." Grateful for having my own earnings funneled into their pockets. That was when the weight of it all nearly crushed me. Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tense while she slept peacefully inches away. I couldn't rest, couldn't think of anything else but the storm I was in the middle of. My chest ached constantly, a knot of anxiety that never loosened. Friends called, but I ignored them. I didn't know how to explain without sounding like I was unraveling. And in truth, I was. I stopped eating much. Coffee became my fuel, a way to get through long hours at work where I put on a mask of professionalism. But the moment I walked through my front door, the mask slipped. The walls closed in. The laughter of her family on the other end of her phone calls felt like it was echoing through the house itself. And worst of all, there were moments when I almost convinced myself that maybe this was all I deserved. Maybe I wasn't enough. But even at my lowest, something inside me refused to die completely. I didn't yell. I didn't pack my bags and storm out. Instead, I grew quieter, more observant. If they thought I was broken, they would stop looking so closely. So I let them believe it. I nodded when her father lectured me. I smiled weakly when her mother critiqued me. I pretended not to notice when more of my belongings vanished. I played the role of the defeated husband because that's what they wanted. At night, though, while my wife slept, I planned. I pulled out a notebook I kept hidden in my car and began writing everything down. Dates, times, amounts, names. I printed statements at work, stashing them in a folder behind a locked drawer. I photographed receipts, storage unit keys, even snippets of conversations. Piece by piece, I began building a map of their scheme. It wasn't revenge yet, it was survival. My way of clawing back some sense of control while they stripped me bare. Rock bottom was realizing I had already lost so much, but refusing to let that loss be the end of the story. And then came the breaking point, the moment when I stopped being just a quiet observer and started becoming something else entirely. It came on an ordinary afternoon, with a single comment that pushed me from silent suffering into a new, sharper resolve. That was when the tide began to turn, though none of them saw it yet. That breaking point came on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I'd just walked in from work, shoulders heavy, when my wife looked up from her phone with that too sweet smile she always used when she was hiding something. "Mom says you should start looking for apartments," she said casually, like she was asking me to pick up milk. "You know, something affordable. It'll be easier for everyone once this is finalized." Her tone, that air of superiority, struck me harder than her words. It wasn't even her idea, it was her mother's. And she wasn't suggesting it. She was informing me, like the decision had already been made. Something inside me hardened. I nodded, said nothing, and went upstairs. But in that silence, in that tiny act of swallowing my pride instead of fighting back, I realized I had already turned a corner. I wasn't broken anymore. I was done waiting for them to destroy me. I was going to build myself back up, not just for survival, but for the satisfaction of watching their faces when they realized I was untouchable. The first step was reclaiming my energy. I stopped wasting nights staring at the ceiling. Instead, I got up early, started running again. At first it was grueling. I was out of shape, my lungs burned, my legs screamed. But after a few weeks, I felt stronger, clearer. The fog in my mind began to lift. Work, too, became an outlet. I poured myself into projects, staying late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My boss noticed. He pulled me aside one day and said, "Jacob, I've been watching the way you handle things under pressure. I think it's time we talked about moving you up." That was the moment the climb began. Within weeks, I was sitting in meetings I'd never been invited to before, my name suddenly attached to bigger clients, bigger numbers. The raise came quietly, almost as if my boss wanted to shield me from envy, but the bump was substantial. More importantly, I had leverage, independence. Money was no longer flowing straight through my hands into accounts I couldn't touch. I opened new ones, carefully, discreetly, diverting funds before they could vanish. Every paycheck became a little more secure. Outside of work, I started reaching out to old friends again. People I had let drift away during the years of suffocating under my wife's family shadow. Some were surprised to hear from me, but most welcomed me back with open arms. Drinks after work turned into late-night conversations, and I remembered what it felt like to laugh without looking over my shoulder. One friend, an old college buddy, even reconnected me with a financial advisor he trusted. Quietly, I began shifting pieces of my life into safer hands, assets they didn't even know I had. Meanwhile, I perfected the mask. At home, I played the role of the docile husband better than ever. I nodded when my wife talked about our future plans with her family. I feigned cluelessness when her father dropped not-so-subtle hints about the house being in their names soon. I even complimented her mother's redecorating choices, smiling as if I hadn't noticed that each new change erased another piece of me. They grew more confident, more careless, while I grew sharper. And then there were the small victories, the ones that no one else saw. Like the afternoon my wife handed me a bill to pay. "Dad said this one's urgent," and I looked her straight in the eye, smiled, and told her I'd already taken care of it. What she didn't know was that I had rerouted the money, creating a trail only I could follow. Or the evening her brother Ryan bragged about a big investment he was making with their parents' help, not realizing that the account he thought was feeding it had already been frozen under my quiet, legal maneuvering. Piece by piece, I was rising. I wasn't flaunting it. Not yet. But inside, I felt taller, stronger. The nights were no longer sleepless. They were filled with plans. My notebook, once scribbled with desperation, became a blueprint. I knew where the money was going. I knew who was involved. I knew exactly how to pull the rug out from under them. The shift was so gradual they didn't notice. My wife still thought she was leading the game, still thought her secret chats and whispered plans were invisible to me. Her mother still looked at me with that same condescending smirk. But beneath the surface, power was shifting. They were playing checkers while I had quietly started a game of chess. And just when I thought I was prepared, fate handed me something even better, a piece of information, almost too perfect, that changed everything. It fell into my lap during a routine day, disguised as ordinary paperwork. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't just useful. It was the key I had been waiting for. That was the moment I stopped planning revenge in theory. That was the moment I started preparing for the execution. The discovery came in the most mundane way possible. An envelope slipped into our mailbox one Thursday afternoon. It was addressed to my wife, but the return address caught my eye, a local law firm, one I recognized from my own line of work. Curiosity gnawed at me. Normally, I wouldn't have touched her mail. But given everything I'd already uncovered, my conscience was clear. I slid it open carefully, and what I found nearly made me laugh out loud. Inside was a preliminary draft of a trust agreement. My wife's name was on it, along with her parents and brothers. The wording made it clear. Once the divorce went through, any joint assets from our marriage would be funneled into this family trust. They were planning to lock me out entirely: house, accounts, even personal investments I had made. To them, it was airtight. To me, it was the missing puzzle piece. The irony was delicious. In their eagerness to put everything in writing, They had handed me proof of their collusion. And better yet, the draft contained enough errors to be legally questionable. I tucked the envelope away in my locked drawer at work, the edges of my plan starting to crystallize. That same week, my promotion at work became official. My new role gave me access to higher-level accounts and contacts I hadn't had before. Among them was a former colleague who had transitioned into family law. We caught up over coffee, and while I didn't spill everything right away, I tested the waters by describing a hypothetical situation. The way his eyebrows shot up told me I wasn't crazy. "If that's true," he said, leaning in, "you're sitting on a gold mine of leverage." It was the first time someone outside my head confirmed what I already felt. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was in a powerful position. From there, my quiet setup began. I opened a private account with the help of that financial advisor my friend had connected me to, carefully redirecting my income. I started moving small but significant amounts into safe investments, things they couldn't touch without me. At the same time, I doubled down on gathering proof. Screenshots of the family chat, copies of the trust draft, records of the furniture and valuables disappearing. I cataloged everything. I even installed a discreet camera in the garage after noticing more of my belongings were vanishing. Within a week, I had footage of her brother loading my tools into his truck while my wife held the door open for him. And then came the moment that sealed their fate. One night, my wife left her laptop open again, this time with her email pulled up. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There, in black and white, was a message from her to her mother. "Once Jacob signs the settlement, we'll be free. Dad said he can move the title paperwork that same week." Attached was a scan of our property deed. My name, clear as day, already marked for removal. They weren't just plotting, they were scheduling my erasure like a meeting on their calendar. But here's the part they didn't realize. That property deed, the house they loved to lord over me, wasn't as cleanly theirs as they thought. My promotion had given me access to corporate legal counsel, and with a quiet consultation, I learned something they hadn't bothered to check. The way the deed had been filed, thanks to my down payment and the structure of the mortgage, gave me far more rights than they believed. If they tried to push me out, they'd be in for a legal nightmare. I kept that to myself. Let them believe I was powerless. Let them smile and smirk while I quietly built the kind of arsenal they couldn't imagine. And through it all, I played the role of the broken husband to perfection. I ate dinner quietly. I nodded when my wife announced, "Mom thinks we should redecorate the living room again." I even offered to help move more of my things, pretending not to notice how gleeful she was about it. They thought they were gutting me. But every piece they took only tightened the net I was weaving. By the time spring rolled around, I wasn't the same man they'd humiliated at that birthday dinner. I was leaner, sharper, more focused. I had money tucked away, allies quietly aligned, and a folder so thick with evidence that it could bury them all. And then came the family gathering where everything shifted. A smug comment, a slip of the tongue, and suddenly the perfect opportunity to set my plan in motion dropped into my lap. That was the moment I knew the time for quiet endurance was ending. The stage was nearly set. The curtain was about to rise. And for the first time in months, I was the one smiling. It was a Sunday evening in early spring when the moment arrived. My wife had insisted we attend a family dinner, the kind of gathering I used to dread, where the table was always heavy with food, but even heavier with contempt. This time, though, I walked in calm, collected, my folder of evidence locked safely in my car outside. I knew what I was carrying. I knew what they didn't. Her parents greeted me with the same thin smiles as always, the kind that never reached their eyes. Her father patted me on the back like I was a child being humored, and her mother gave me that sharp once-over, as though checking if I was still properly under her thumb. My wife barely looked at me. She was too busy whispering to her brother, both of them grinning like children sharing a secret. We sat down, and as always, the conversation turned against me within minutes. Ryan leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, Jacob, have you found a place yet? Mom says those apartments near downtown are cheap enough for you." The table erupted in laughter. My wife giggled, covering her mouth like she didn't want to seem cruel, but the sparkle in her eyes betrayed her. Normally, I would have clenched my jaw, stayed silent, let their words wash over me. Not this time. This time, I let the silence stretch a moment too long. Then, with the calmest smile I've ever worn, I said, "Funny thing about places to live. You'd be surprised what names are actually on the deed. The laughter faltered. My father-in-law's brow creased. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice sharper than before. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. It means I hope none of you are planning renovations just yet. It would be awkward to invest money into a house you can't legally claim. The room went still. My wife's fork clattered against her plate. Her mother narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? The house is ours. Everyone knows that. That was when I pulled out the first thread of my carefully woven net. I slid a folded paper from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Mortgage records, I said evenly. Filed in both our names. With my down payment noted. You'd be shocked how much weight that carries in court. Her father snatched up the paper, scanning it quickly, his jaw tightening. My wife shifted uncomfortably, her face paling. For the first time in years, they didn't look smug, they looked uncertain. And that's just the beginning. I continued, my tone almost casual. See, I've been keeping track. Every transfer, every piece of furniture, every little favor you've done in my name. Interesting how much of my money has been moving without my signature. Courts don't like that sort of thing. My wife's voice broke as she tried to intervene. Jacob, you're making this sound worse than. Worse than what? I cut in softly, locking eyes with her. Worse than the family group chat where you all planned to strip me of everything? Or worse than the draft trust agreement you so carelessly left lying around? Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her brothers exchanged uneasy glances. Even her mother, always the sharpest tongue at the table, had fallen silent. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Here's the reality. You thought you had me cornered. You thought I'd walk away with nothing. But what you didn't count on was me paying attention. Every message, every receipt, every recording, I have it all. And if I were to walk into court tomorrow, not only would you lose your precious plan, but some of you might face questions about fraud. The weight of the word fraud hung in the air like smoke. Ryan muttered something under his breath, and Daniel actually pushed his chair back as if to distance himself. My wife's mother's lips trembled before she forced them into a tight line. And the best part, I added, letting a small smile curl my lips. I don't even have to rush. I've already secured myself financially. I've already moved on professionally. I'm not the one at risk anymore. You are. For the first time in years, I wasn't the outsider at their table. I was the one holding the cards. I stood slowly, letting my chair scrape back across the hardwood. Dinner was lovely, I said lightly, sliding my hands into my pockets. But I think I've had enough for one lifetime. Don't worry, you'll be hearing from me soon. As I walked out of that house, I didn't hear laughter behind me. I didn't hear mocking voices or smug chuckles. I heard silence. Thick, heavy silence. And in that silence, I knew my revenge had only just begun. Because the next step wasn't just shaking their confidence. It was making sure every last one of them faced the fallout they so richly deserved. The fallout came quicker than even I anticipated. Within a week of that dinner, I had filed the necessary motions with my attorney, armed with the folder I had been building for months. The look on his face when he saw the group chat screenshots, the trust draft, and the video footage of my brother-in-law hauling away my belongings was priceless. Jacob, he said, tapping the papers with a grin, this isn't just leverage. This is a wrecking ball. The legal wheels began to turn, and suddenly the family who had once laughed at me was scrambling. My wife received notice of my countersuit, and the shock was written all over her face. She tried to plead with me in the kitchen one night, her voice trembling. We can work this out quietly, Jacob. You don't have to drag everyone into this. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No love, no anger, just a cool certainty. You already dragged everyone into this, I replied. Now you get to live with the consequences. Her parents weren't spared either. When my attorney presented evidence of their financial meddling, the judge wasted no time freezing the accounts tied to the trust they had so proudly drafted. The family fund they thought would secure their wealth became the very rope that tied them down. My father-in-law's face turned crimson in court, sputtering about misunderstandings, while my mother-in-law sat pale and rigid, her once sharp tongue silenced by the weight of undeniable proof. Ryan and Daniel tried to play innocent, claiming they had only followed their parents' lead. But the footage of Ryan carrying my tools and the paper trail of Daniel borrowing from joint accounts buried their excuses. The judge ordered restitution, and suddenly the golden boys were scrambling for loans, their smug grins replaced by panic. As for the house, the crown jewel they thought they'd steal out from under me, it remained mine. The court ruled firmly in my favor, recognizing my down payment, my mortgage contributions, and the blatant fraud attempted against me. My wife was ordered to vacate within 30 days. Watching her pack her things, the same woman who once recorded my humiliation with glee, was a strange mix of cathartic and surreal. She muttered bitter words under her breath, but her eyes never met mine. She knew she had lost. The final blow, though, came in the form of reputation. The family who once strutted around town with superiority suddenly found themselves whispered about. Their business associates, neighbors, even extended relatives, all had caught wind of the court case. The same people they tried so hard to impress now avoided them. The empire of control they had built crumbled, not with fire and fury, but with the quiet erosion of respect and trust. For me, life became lighter. My promotion flourished into a leadership role, my private accounts secured my independence, and I even found myself reconnecting with old friends in ways I hadn't thought possible. The house, once suffocating with their presence, became mine in truth, every corner a reminder not of what I lost, but of what I reclaimed. Months later, I drove past their family home out of curiosity. The shutters were drawn, the yard unkempt, the once bustling house eerily quiet. They had retreated into the shadows, broken by their own schemes. And as I parked back at my place, stepping out into the calm evening air, I couldn't help but think back to that birthday dinner. The smirks, the laughter, the humiliation they thought would define me. They were right about one thing, it did define me. Just not the way they intended. Because that night, when I signed those papers and walked out, they believed I was finished. In reality, it was the day they signed away their own downfall. And in the silence they left behind, I finally smiled.